In 1972, the Mr. Peanut mascot walked through Midtown Manhattan, a costume brand ambassador engaging in the kind of street-level commercial promotion that American corporations had been using to build consumer recognition since the early 20th century. In October 1978, Florence Thompson, the woman in Dorothea Lange's iconic 1936 migrant mother photograph, held up her own famous image during an interview, a moment connecting the depths of the Depression to the woman who had come to symbolize it. Catherine Bowes-Lyon, Queen Elizabeth II's first cousin, was quietly institutionalized in Surrey in 1941, listed as deceased in Burke's Peerage in 1963, found alive by journalists in 1987, and never publicly acknowledged by any member of the royal family throughout her life. On June 23, 1996, a demonstration for LGBTQ visibility was photographed in West Hollywood, one of countless public gatherings during a decade when the movement was building both legal momentum and cultural presence across American cities. A photograph brought together three distinctive entertainment personalities, a gathering of public figures whose separate careers each represented very different corners of American popular culture. In 1974, Elvis Presley shot his hotel suite television in Las Vegas after becoming irritated by a singer's performance. The damaged set was preserved at Graceland, a piece of celebrity memorabilia capturing something essential about Elvis's complicated relationship with fame. Around 1955, Liberace was photographed boarding a flight to Paris with a member of his fan club, the flamboyant entertainer at the height of his early career popularity, his theatrical persona already fully formed and enthusiastically embraced by devoted audiences. In 1951, Marilyn Monroe was photographed in an image preserved by Getty, a picture from the period when her career was accelerating rapidly toward the stardom that would define the following decade. In 1964, Robert F. Kennedy fist-bumped his young son, a spontaneous gesture of paternal affection captured decades before the fist bump became a common form of greeting, making it a surprisingly modern-looking image from the early 1960s. In 1989, Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David took a break from working on the Seinfeld television project, two writers and comedians in the early stages of creating a show that would become one of the most successful and discussed sitcoms in American television history. On April 30th, 1945, a bugler played taps at the American Military Cemetery in Margraten, Netherlands, a memorial ceremony at one of the largest American military burial grounds in Europe, honoring the soldiers who had passed away liberating the continent. In 1963, photographer Yusuf Karsh captured Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, a portrait by one of the century's most celebrated portraitists of a man whose personality combined genuine warmth with the capacity for tremendous political brutality. A 1999 advertisement for the online retailer Buy.com captured the aesthetic and aspirations of early internet commerce, a moment when the possibility of purchasing almost anything online was still new enough to require enthusiastic consumer education. On July 4th, 1922, a 4th of July celebration was photographed in Tacoma Park, Maryland, an Independence Day community gathering during the post-war decade that had followed the First World War and preceded the economic collapse that was coming. In 1979, Texas passing row inmates Ronald O'Brien and Raymond Riles were photographed playing dominoes at the Ellis Unit, an image of ordinary leisure within an extraordinary and final circumstance. The men passing time with a game in a place from which neither would leave free. In 1913, Dutch photographer Thomas Post captured a Dutch farm family in Groningen, a boy holding a sheep while his brothers lay in a stable bed. An image of rural agricultural life so specific and genuine that it transcends documentation to become genuine portraiture. On June 29, 1995, Seoul's Sampoong department store collapsed and lost their life 502 people. A disaster caused by negligent construction, and the owner's decision to bribe inspectors rather than address structural problems they knew were threatening the building. Fulbul, a Brûlé Sioux medicine man who lived from 1844 to 1909, was photographed, an indigenous healer and spiritual leader documented during the decades when the reservation system was constraining the cultural practices that had defined his entire life. Around 1916, a Hesquiat indigenous woman was photographed wrapped in a shawl, a member of a Nuu-chah-nulth people whose name derives from a traditional food preparation technique involving herring spawn from the waters near their Canadian coastal territory. In 1985, Soviet soldiers posed in front of an ancient fortress in Khost Province, Afghanistan, a photograph of military occupiers standing before a structure that had witnessed centuries of foreign armies arriving in a country that has always outlasted them. In the early 2000s, Dolly the sheep was photographed with her creator, Sir Ian Wilmot, at the Roslin Institute in Scotland, the first mammal cloned from an adult cell, a scientific achievement that permanently changed the conversation about the biological boundaries of reproduction. Between 1961 and 1972, young women of South Vietnam's People's Self-Defense Force patrolled a hamlet's perimeter near Saigon, ordinary civilians taking on military defensive responsibilities in a conflict that had dissolved the distinction between soldiers and communities. On July 5th, 1944, two Javanese laborers who had escaped Japanese captivity were rescued by American infantry on Nomfor Island, men whose ordeal in the Pacific War's labor system made their rescue both a military operation and a humanitarian act. In 1947, Japanese children at a Tokyo department store tried out toy jeeps bearing the "Kilroy was here" slogan, a post-war image of American cultural influence flowing through children's toys into a society that was simultaneously occupied and rebuilding. In 1931, excavation operations at the Oak Island Money Pit in Nova Scotia were documented. One episode in a treasure-hunting obsession that has consumed generations of searchers, none of whom have definitively resolved what, if anything, the pit actually contains. In 2010, Steve Jobs revealed the Apple iPad, introducing a device that would reshape the tablet computer market and create entirely new habits of media consumption for hundreds of millions of people who had not previously known they needed one. On July 5, 1944, a Royal Army Veterinary Corps sergeant bandaged the wounded ear of mine-detecting dog Jasper in Normandy, a moment of careful veterinary compassion for one of the many animals whose trained skills were saving human lives during the Liberation Campaign. On July 5, 1946, French designer Louis Réard introduced the modern bikini in Paris, naming it after Bikini Atoll to predict explosive public reaction, the 30-square-inch swimsuit exposing the navel in a deliberate challenge to the era's social conventions. In 1931, Grodno, then part of Poland and now in Belarus, was photographed, a borderland city whose geographic position between east and west would make it one of the places most dramatically transformed by the political upheavals of the following decade. In May 1963, 15-year-old Walter Gadsden was photographed being attacked by police dogs during a Birmingham civil rights march, an image so viscerally disturbing that it helped shift national opinion and contributed directly to the political pressure that produced meaningful civil rights legislation. In January 1945, a captured German soldier shielded his face from the camera near Weywurts, Belgium, a man who had fought through the Ardennes offensive and was now in American custody during the war's final winter campaign. In 1945, a girl looked out over the ruins of Warsaw, a city almost completely destroyed during the war, its rebuilding representing one of the 20th century's most ambitious and symbolically charged acts of urban reconstruction. In 1984, an Afghan communist revolutionary was photographed in Kabul holding an AK-47 while dressed in traditional clothing, a visual contradiction that captured the complex relationship between ideology and cultural identity in a country simultaneously fighting a foreign occupation and an internal civil war. In 1968, photographer Bill Epridge captured Robert Kennedy mortally wounded on the floor of the Ambassador Hotel kitchen, an image taken for Life magazine in the seconds after the attack that became one of the most significant political photographs of the 20th century. In 1951, photographer Robert Capa documented a moment in Hanko, Norway, part of a career that had already produced some of the century's most significant combat photography, and would end 3 years later when he stepped on a landmine in Vietnam. Between 1948 and 1952, the White House was completely gutted and rebuilt, the structure's exterior preserved, while everything inside was replaced. The renovation hidden from public view in one of the most significant renovations of a national landmark in American history. Princess Diana was photographed chatting with Bryan Adams after a Vancouver concert, a casual backstage encounter between two public figures who each carried their celebrity with very different levels of comfort and self-consciousness. In 1913, veterans of both the Union and Confederate armies gathered at Gettysburg for a reunion, old men who had fought each other 50 years earlier, meeting across the anniversary of the battle that had defined their lives. In 1953, Miffy creator Dick Bruna was photographed with his wife Irene in Paris, a Dutch artist, years before he would draw the simple white rabbit that would become one of children's literature's most enduringly beloved characters. In 1975, West 42nd Street between 7th and 8th Avenues in New York City was photographed, a block at the height of its notorious reputation for adult entertainment and street-level commerce that would be completely transformed by the neighborhood's later development. In 1922, Albert Einstein was photographed actually delivering a lecture on the theory of relativity, a rare image of the physicist in the act of teaching a concept that had already made him internationally famous and would shape physics for the following century. On August 14, 1945, crowds poured into Times Square to celebrate Japan's surrender, one of the most famous public celebrations in American history. The relief and joy of people who had spent years under the shadow of war finally released in a single, overwhelming moment. Cetshwayo, king of the Zulu people who led his forces to a devastating victory over British troops at Isanawana in 1879, was photographed a military leader whose tactical brilliance produced the worst British colonial defeat in Africa and permanently complicated Victorian narratives of imperial invincibility. A literary letter written in 1266 on behalf of Kublai Khan to the King of Japan demanded submission before the Mongol invasions. Annotations explaining points of grammar were added to aid Japanese readers, making the document both a diplomatic ultimatum and a language teaching tool. In 1945, Shirley Temple posed beside a painted portrait of herself as a young child, an actress who had been famous for over a decade, pausing to consider the smaller version of herself that had captured the world's heart long before she could fully understand what fame meant. In 1909, the last emperor of China, 4-year-old Puyi, was photographed, a child placed on the dragon throne at age 2 and deposed at age 6. His extraordinary life spanning from imperial court to war criminal to museum curator. In 1945, Soviet schoolchildren gave United States Ambassador Averell Harriman a carved wooden Great Seal as a gift. It hung in his Moscow office for 7 years before American intelligence discovered it contained a sophisticated Soviet listening device requiring no power source to operate. On March 4, 1933, President-elect Franklin Roosevelt rode to the Capitol beside outgoing President Herbert Hoover, two men representing entirely different approaches to the crisis consuming the country. The awkward silence between them reportedly palpable throughout the entire journey. In September 2001, Ground Zero in New York was photographed. Images from the weeks after the attacks as workers, first responders, and investigators worked through the ruins of a disaster whose consequences were still impossible to fully comprehend. On July 4, 1996, Hotmail was launched by Sabir Bhatia and Jack Smith, one of the world's first free web-based email services. Its availability to anyone with internet access, representing a genuine democratization of digital communication. On June 29, 1996, over 1,000 inmates were lost their life at Abu Salim prison in Tripoli, during a mass taking the life by forces loyal to the Gaddafi regime, one of the most significant and least internationally reported atrocities of the decade. On June 25, 1996, Will Smith, Jada Pinkett Smith, and young Trey Smith attended the Independence Day premiere, a family at the launch of the blockbuster film that would cement Smith's status as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. Around 1870, Clay Allison recuperated after accidentally attacking himself in the foot during a mule stampede, a man whose capacity for violence was matched only by his capacity for creating situations in which accidents became inevitable. Between 1896 and 1905, Chung-On operated a Chinese merchandise business in Virginia City, Montana, a photograph of an immigrant entrepreneur in the American West during an era of significant anti-Chinese prejudice and legal discrimination. In the 1990s, actress Jennifer Connelly was photographed during a decade when her career was steadily building toward the recognition that her genuine dramatic talent had always deserved. In 1994, Muammar Gaddafi was photographed with one of his bodyguards in Cairo, the Libyan leader who had surrounded himself with an all-female security detail. A choice that was simultaneously a genuine feminist statement and a calculated piece of political theater. In 1978, Jerry and Ben Stiller were photographed together in New York City, a father and son who would each build significant comedic careers, their shared family talent for timing and performance visible even in an informal snapshot. In 1959, Marilyn Monroe slipped aboard a flight from New York to Los Angeles, an unguarded, candid image of the world's most photographed woman in a completely private moment of ordinary human exhaustion. In 1970, Olivia Newton-John was photographed at an English music festival, early career documentation of a performer whose combination of natural warmth and genuine vocal quality was beginning to attract the attention that would build into international stardom. A glamorous woman from the 1930s was photographed, an image capturing the particular aesthetic of a decade that produced some of the most sophisticated and dramatically designed fashion and personal presentation in the history of popular culture. In 1846, photographer Nicholas Shepard captured one of the earliest known photographs of Abraham Lincoln in Springfield, Illinois. Lincoln 40 years before becoming president, his face not yet carrying the weight that the war years would add to his famous features. A 1968 wedding reception captured an unexpected moment of conflict, the kind of human drama that candid event photography sometimes preserves entirely without intention. The camera turning a celebration into a document of something more complicated. On July 4th, 1986, actress Heather Thomas performed at Farm Aid, a benefit concert that brought together major American musical acts to support family farmers during a period of significant agricultural economic crisis. In 1981, an 18-year-old Tom Cruise appeared in his first film, Endless Love, early career work from an actor whose combination of natural screen presence and determined professionalism would soon make him one of Hollywood's most bankable and enduring stars. In 1971, photographer Victor Skrybnevsky captured Dennis Hopper, John Ford, and John Huston together in Palm Springs, three figures from very different eras and sensibilities of American cinema sharing a frame that represented the full arc of the medium's history. In the early 1970s, an Iranian woman enjoyed the shores of the Caspian Sea. A personal leisure image from a country whose social freedoms would be fundamentally transformed by the revolution at the end of the decade. In the 1970s, actress Jacqueline Bisset was photographed during a career that had established her as one of the decade's most internationally recognized and admired film presences. In 1942, British merchant mariner Poon Lim was left alone on a life raft in the Atlantic after his ship was sunk, drifting for 133 days before rescue near Brazil in 1943, setting a survival record he hoped with quiet understatement that nobody would ever need to break. In 1992, Nick Cave and Henry Rollins were photographed babysitting together, two of alternative music's most intense and intellectually formidable performers captured in a domestic situation that required an entirely different set of skills than either had publicly displayed. Throughout the 1940s, the Three Stooges performed USO shows between filming their comedy shorts, bringing their physical comedy and cheerful chaos to American service members who needed something to laugh about more than almost anything else. A 4,000-year-old Stone Age woman's face was reconstructed from a skull found in Sweden by forensic artist Oscar Nilsson, her features emerging from ancient bone with enough individuality to make her feel like a specific person rather than a historical abstraction. A postcard wishing Happy New Year for 1911 preserved the particular visual style and social customs of greeting card culture from the early 20th century, a moment of ordinary human connection across the distance that a century and a decade has since made extraordinary. Muhammad Ali played vinyl records in his 1959 Cadillac Eldorado, the young boxer who would become the world's most famous athlete enjoying music in one of the era's most desirable automobiles, the image capturing his personal style before the world had fully discovered it. Two photographs of Soviet soldier Evgeny Kobytev, taken 4 years apart, showed the devastating physical transformation that the Eastern Front inflicted on those who survived it. The same face carrying an entirely different relationship to the world between the two exposures. In 1939, a migrant family sat together inside their trailer home in Edinburgh, Texas. A portrait of resilience amid the constant movement that defined agricultural labor during one of the most economically difficult periods in American history. In 1962, young girls practiced balance and posture at the Moppet Charm School in Washington, formal training in the social expectations placed on girls during an era when such skills were considered essential preparation for respectable adult life. In 1937, an Indiana farmer sat with 4 of his 9 children in their family living room, a portrait of Depression-era rural America, the room carrying the particular dignity of people making do with very little and not apologizing for any of it. A family gathered at a Pizza Hut in the 1970s, the restaurant chain at the height of its role as a genuine destination for family celebration. Its red-roofed buildings becoming a fixture of American suburban commercial landscapes. In 1968, a family examined a new RCA color television at a Murphy store, a consumer moment from the era when color TV was transitioning from luxury item to standard household expectation, the purchase representing a genuine domestic milestone. In 1940, a Tennessee teacher led her students in prayer at a one-room schoolhouse, an ordinary morning ritual in rural education during a period when the separation of religious practice and public schooling was not yet legally defined in ways that affected local communities. In the 1960s, vending machines offered household grocery items including canned soups, tea, and cereal, an attempt to extend the convenience of automated retail to everyday food shopping that found limited acceptance before supermarkets consolidated their dominance. In 1979, the windows on the World Restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center served guests with views extending across New York Harbor to the Statue of Liberty, a dining experience that placed its customers at the center of what felt like the entire world. In 1943, New York City apartment dwellers relaxed on their building's rooftop, urban residents making creative use of every available outdoor space in a city where ground-level leisure was always competing with the density of everything else. In 1940, children attended a one-room schoolhouse in Breathitt County, Kentucky, many of them barefoot, an image of rural Appalachian education where poverty shaped every aspect of daily life, including the most basic question of what children wore to class. In 1957, a worm vending machine offered fishing bait 24 hours a day, a piece of rural commercial infrastructure that solved the specific problem of anglers needing live bait at hours when conventional bait shops would not be open. In 1939, a farm boy bought a soda at a general store in Lamoille, Iowa, a simple moment of small-town commercial pleasure captured during the final year of the Depression. The cold drink representing one of the era's most affordable and dependable satisfactions. In the 1950s, kindergartners were photographed napping at their desks, mandatory rest periods built into the school day based on genuine understanding of young children's physical and cognitive needs, a practice that many adults look back on with nostalgic appreciation. In 1946, children in a Harlan County, Kentucky coal camp were photographed, some barefoot, faces showing the resilience and genuine joy that can exist alongside material hardship, their smiles making the poverty visible in their surroundings feel even more affecting. A child of a Great Depression-era day labor in Oklahoma, was photographed in worn overalls beside a weathered home, an image that placed an individual face and specific story on the systemic poverty that was reshaping millions of American lives during those years. In the 1980s, Chess King clothing stores were destinations for mall fashion, retail establishments that served the particular aesthetic preferences of a decade, whose relationship between popular music, television, and clothing created some of the most immediately recognizable consumer looks in American history. In 1962, high school students learned to use tools and machinery in shop class, vocational education that gave working-class young men practical skills directly applicable to careers in manufacturing, construction, and the skilled trades that shaped post-war American industry. In the 1960s, two young women enjoyed lunch at a Burger Chef restaurant, a casual friendship meal at a fast food chain that competed seriously with McDonald's, before eventually disappearing, its orange and brown interior now existing only in photographs and memory. In the 1950s, a rum vending machine dispensed beverages at the push of a button, an automated alcohol retail concept that operated briefly in several American states before regulatory concerns and changing consumer preferences limited its commercial viability. A 1950s Tupperware party was photographed, a gathering of women that combined genuine social connection with direct sales, the format creating a new commercial model that gave suburban women both income opportunity and community in the same evening. McDonald's food packaging from the 1980s was documented, the distinctive branding and container design of an era when the Golden Arches were expanding globally, and the company's visual identity was becoming one of the most recognized in the world. In 1898, a lamplighter worked his nightly route in Ireland, a skilled municipal worker who lit gas lamps by hand each evening and extinguished them each morning, performing a job that electric infrastructure would make entirely unnecessary within the following decade. The cast of the 1971 film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory was photographed, performers who brought Roald Dahl's eccentric imagination to life in a production that became more beloved with each passing decade. An early photograph showed infant Queen Elizabeth. Later, the longest reigning British monarch, held by her mother in 1926, two people photographed in an ordinary maternal moment with no knowledge of the extraordinary public life that the child was going to lead. In 1912, one of the first photographs of the Nefertiti bust was taken at Amarna shortly after its discovery by Ludwig Borchardt, an image of an artifact that would become one of the most recognized sculptures in the ancient world, its beauty immediately apparent. Around 900 years ago, a Viking named Halvdan carved his name into a marble slab in the upper gallery of Hagia Sophia, a runic inscription that has survived to the present as a reminder that even a 1,000-year-old church attracts people who want to leave their mark. In 1919, a well-dressed young couple and their daughter were photographed in Svinholt, Sweden, a family portrait from the post-war years capturing the quiet domestic happiness of people rebuilding ordinary life after the disruptions of the previous decade. In 1960, 6-year-old Ruby Bridges walked to her newly desegregated school in New Orleans, accompanied by U.S. Marshals, a first grader's extraordinary courage making her one of the most significant figures of the civil rights era's most difficult years. In 1970, 23-year-old Gary Anderson created the recycling logo, a design so immediately legible and universally adopted that it became one of the 20th century's most recognized symbols, its creator receiving almost no financial compensation. In 1915, the French Army's wine stocks were photographed on Lemnos Island before the Gallipoli campaign, military logistics that treated wine as an essential supply item, the bottles awaiting distribution to troops about to face one of the war's most catastrophic amphibious operations. In 1956, photographer Robert Frank captured U.S. Route 91 leaving Blackfoot, Idaho, one image from his landmark American photographic project that documented the diversity and loneliness of the country's roads, towns, and people with unprecedented honesty. Between 1956 and 1963, photographer Han Young-soo documented Jangchungdan Park in Seoul, images from a city rebuilding after the Korean War, the park offering ordinary leisure space to a population navigating trauma and the hope of reconstruction simultaneously. At a July 4th, 1940 celebration in Salisbury, Maryland, children raced homemade soapbox cars, gravity-powered vehicles built from whatever materials their young engineers could find, the race a celebration of ingenuity as much as speed. In 1960, photographer Sune Johnson captured Helen Jansson drinking coffee in Nordmeling, Sweden, one image from his decades-long documentation of rural Swedish working-class life, whose quiet dignity made it one of Scandinavian photography's most important bodies of work. In 1939, Dorothea Lange photographed the nursery of an FSA migrant worker camp in Tulare County, one image in her systematic documentation of the human cost of the Dust Bowl migration that brought hundreds of thousands of desperate families to California. In 1940, a girl sat outside her, struck by an explosive device London home, a child's ordinary world of front steps and familiar streets, transformed into rubble and absence by the Blitz, her presence in the ruins both heartbreaking and quietly defiant. In 1986, the Nintendo Entertainment System was photographed, the console that rescued the American video game market from near total collapse and introduced an entire generation to characters and game mechanics that would define the industry for decades. In 1928, Dolores Costello, who was Drew Barrymore's grandmother, was photographed as a silent film actress, a performer from one of Hollywood's most significant family lineages, whose own career predated the era when her granddaughter would become one of the industry's most enduring figures. From 1950 to 1954, Nash Motors produced the Nash Rambler, a compact American automobile whose fuel efficiency and practical design were ahead of their time, the car anticipating by decades the shift towards smaller vehicles that economic pressures would eventually make inevitable. In the 1960s, child safety in automobile seats was approached with methods that modern parents would find deeply alarming, a reminder of how recently the combination of research, advocacy, and regulation transformed the basic protections provided to children during travel. High school yearbook photographs of the Friends cast from the 1980s preserved the actors in their teenage years, images from before any of them had discovered the roles that would make their faces recognizable to television audiences across the world. In 1935, Kangaroo Jump's rebound shoes were advertised, an early attempt at incorporating spring mechanisms into footwear to enhance athletic performance, a concept that would be reinvented and commercialized multiple times across the following century. Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov and American astronaut Deke Slayton were photographed during the Apollo-Soyuz mission. Two spacemen from rival superpowers sharing genuine personal warmth during a joint operation that millions of people around the world watched as a symbol of Cold War thaw.